Depending upon your location, good afternoon or good morning, and welcome to day 4 of the 31st annual edition of the Definiti Retirement Academy. My name is Thomas Brennan. I'm the head of distribution and marketing for Definiti, and we're a national retirement services firm specializing in defined contribution, defined benefit, including cash balance, pension outsourcing, 316, and consulting services for more than 10,000 organizations across the country, representing more than 16 billion in assets under management. I'm delighted that you chose to register to this event that focuses on Definiti's financial advisors and plan sponsors. I speak for my entire organization when I say that we do not take your attendance lightly, understanding that your time is precious in delivering services to your clients. And for that, we thank you. Without its advice, we would not be able to provide its retirement consulting solutions to all of you in efforts to ensure working Americans enjoy the tools necessary to plan for a successful retirement. Definiti firmly believes that TPA no longer stands for third-party administrator, but rather trusted plan ally. I would also be remiss if I didn't also recognize the Definiti associates in the Definiti Retirement Academy Plan Sponsor Track and the members of the Definiti Partners Cooperative for their sponsorship and partnership. Without these two sets of stakeholders, this event, which has now touched several thousand plan sponsors and advisors over the years, would not result in the consistent success it has enjoyed. For this advisor track, I'd like to recognize the firms who are joining us today: American Funds from Capital Group and Transamerica Retirement Solutions. I'd like to mention just a few housekeeping items before we kick things off. So first off, the advisor track of the Definiti Retirement Academy is about you, the financial advisors with whom we work. While we appreciate your registration and attendance during as many sessions as possible, we also understand the reality of your responsibility to your clients. And as a reminder, all sessions of the Definiti Retirement Academy will be recorded, and access to those sessions will be available online in about 2 weeks after the event concludes. Secondly, I also encourage you to submit questions via the chat feature on your Zoom screen. As time allows, the hosts of the sessions and presenting firms will make every effort to answer those questions within the confines of the general session. If time expires in the session or if research is needed to provide an appropriate response, we'll email all attendees with those responses after the sessions close. Thirdly, we want everybody to enjoy and have fun during the sessions and remain engaged. We have a lot of talented people and personalities throughout our organization and among our partners. Please leverage and enjoy this deliverable provided to you to provide insights and intelligence that can propel your retirement advisory practice management. And finally, be certain to engage with your Definiti regional sales director, regional sales consultant, or regional relationship manager to provide feedback on this edition of the Retirement Academy. While we believe we've curated an event full of great content to take your retirement practice management to the next level, we also realize there's always room for improvement and the opportunity to do even more for you and keeping Definiti top of mind as your TPA. Remember, that means trusted plan ally. So thank you for affording me a few moments to welcome you to the Definiti Retirement Academy. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my friends Karen Jurishin and Jason Bortz of American Funds from Capital Group in giving us probably the industry's most timely legislative and regulatory update, only T+2 days from Election Day. So I'm certain all of the information that they'll be providing will provide complete clarity on all of the legislative and regulatory items on which we've been questioning to this point in the year. So Karen and Jason, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Thomas. And I love the TPA reference. That's long overdue as a former TPA myself. I'm Karen Surishin, and I lead the TPA Retirement Plan Counselor team here at American Funds. And it is our great joy and privilege to have time with you today. I'm going to introduce Jason Bortz here in a moment and tell you a little bit about him. And as Thomas said, how timely. Very thankful that we get to provide this conversation to you on the heels of the elections. So before we get started, I do have some enhancements that I want to make sure you're all aware of on both American Funds products, both Record Keeper Direct and Plan Premier TPA. Record Keeper Direct was our first record keeping platform, and we just celebrated 20 years. And we continue to improve the experience for you advisors, our TPAs, plan sponsors, and participants. On Record Keeper Direct, we have recently quadrupled the number of payroll vendors we have available for payroll integration on your plans. And whether you have existing Record Keeper Direct plans with us or you're working to set up a new plan or a conversion plan, payroll integration may be an appropriate avenue to pursue to make your plan administration easier. We also have online enrollment, and many of our new plans have adopted it, and we're getting the communication out to our existing plans as well. And on both platforms, we have an easy, fun, interactive way to increase employee participation and deferral amounts called I Can Retire. And this provides targeted, data-driven email campaigns with personalized, actionable journeys. We recognize so many employers are working hard to attract and retain employees, and we understand that employee benefits are paramount. So before we jump into our presentation with Jason, I want to make you aware of a couple of resources we have on our website, and then we will share those in the chat after the presentation. So I am going to share that right now. The first one is very timely. Can everybody see our Retirement Plan Tuesdays? This is where you can register. You can not only join Jason again, as maybe we have more clarity next month and ongoing, but we also record those for your benefit so you can go back and listen to prior Retirement Plan Tuesdays. And then we have one more that I want to share with you. Actually, I'm going to flip over here. It's our insights, and that's on our, can you guys see that one okay too? Okay, and that is for our financial professionals, all of you, and lots of good information on this. And if I'm going to scroll down, the one thing we really get a lot of positive feedback and engagement is our Capital Ideas webinar. So a lot of good information to hear from our portfolio managers, our analysts, and our economists. So that is the good stuff I have there. So without further ado, Jason and I are going to have a conversation today, but before I jump in, I'm going to give a little background. Jason is our senior counsel at American Funds Capital Group, and he's been practicing law for 24 years, and he's been with us for 10. We started about the same time. And I thought, oh boy, this is a wonderful resource. Throughout his career, Jason has worked on tax and retirement plan issues. Prior to joining us, Jason was a partner in a Washington, D.C. law firm. And before that, he was a law clerk for a federal court of appeals judge. He holds his doctorate from Cornell and a bachelor's in philosophy from Hamilton College. And he's a member of the California, New York State, and Washington, D.C. bars. And Jason is based in Los Angeles. Jason, welcome, and thanks for having this conversation with us.
Yeah, thank you all for joining. It's a really good time to have this conversation. Yeah.
So I have some questions for you, but I didn't know if you wanted to start with some opening remarks or want me just to jump in.
Why don't you just fire away, Ken?
All right. Well, we love the Secure Act. I know it got a little overshadowed by the CARES Act a couple of years ago, but it did give us a tremendous boost. And now we have new legislation coming forward. And the million-dollar question, and I know you get this all the time, you don't have a crystal ball, but do you think it will be enacted this year?
You know, I'm reasonably optimistic. You know, I would kind of say that the industry wisdom is probably that we have a 50 to 70% chance of a pretty big retirement bill happening this year before year end. So that's pretty optimistic. I mean, we usually don't peg odds over 50% very often, but we have a lot of tailwind here. So we've had 3 sort of related retirement plan bills moving through Congress. And to give you a sense for why folks are so, hopeful about a bill happening this year, is the House version passed the House of Representatives by 414 to 5. I mean, that is pretty strong bipartisan support. You don't see too many bills with just 5 no votes in the divided Congress that we have. And then the other 2 related bills unanimously passed the committees of jurisdiction. So the Senate Finance Committee unanimously approved its version of retirement legislation, and the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, the Health Committee, passed its bill unanimously. And there's pretty substantial overlap between all these bills. So definitely it is not retirement policy that will stop a bill from happening. I think it's going to be other stuff, and we can kind of get into what that other stuff is that might sideline it. But I think there's definitely reason for optimism here.
And probably right around the holidays as well, I bet.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way these things seem to happen, is they will mess up your vacation plans. is sort of how it goes. Yep.
So the $1 million question in all this is, how's it going to be paid for? Do you have some ideas around that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little embarrassing. It's kind of a Roth accounting gimmick. The way Congress scores tax legislation is they look over a 10-year period. So if you have an increase in Roth attributes, that pulls income from the future into the 10-year scoring window. And so you get the appearance of raising revenue, even though Roth in some ways is economically equivalent to pre-tax, looked at through a life cycle mirror. And so there are 3 fairly big Roth changes that are very likely to be included in any final package. So the first is moving in the direction of making all catch-up contributions into Roth contributions, even if someone has done pre-tax for their basic deferrals. So all catch-up as Roth is kind of the baseline. And then I'm going to add a little complexity that everybody hates, as we can't kind of ever do things in a simple way. One of the bills would say, hey, all catch-up has to be Roth unless you made less than $100,000 in the preceding year, right? Which will be really fun to kind of integrate with payroll and figure out what people's comp was when you're first figuring out whether it's Roth or pre-tax. We'll see. That's been controversial. Certainly record keepers in the industry have been pushing back and saying, look, we need a simple administrable rule. But the basic direction of travel is think catch-up contribution in the future is going to have to be Roth, right? The second one, as a revenue raiser, is kind of interesting. For the first time, employers would have the option of letting employees designate employer contribution. So think non-elective employer contribution, or even potentially a matching contribution. They could offer employees the ability to designate those as Roth contributions. So the employee would be taxed today. The employer would still get a deduction, but assuming they met the holding requirements and the age requirements for qualified Roth treatment, they would not be taxed on the distribution later. Right, so pretty interesting. Haven't seen that. I would imagine we'll see some uptake on that idea. And the third one is kind of small, but also interesting. Simples, which today cannot have Roth, would be able to have Roth. So you could do Roth treatment. So that's how they raise the revenue. It's not any of the things you might have heard about back with the old Build Back Better Act. This was the Democratic effort at a big tax bill. That would have sort of gotten rid of so-called backdoor Roth conversions, or super mega backdoor Roth conversions and plans you sometimes hear about. Would have put income limits on Roth conversions, would have had an overall cap on savings. That is not going to be included in this bill. That's viewed as partisan. It's out. So all of the revenue raisers are the Roth ones I just described. Yep.
Well, thanks. Those are some pretty big changes for sure. Did Tuesday's elections change anything? Or
yeah,
I mean for this pending legislation?
Yeah, I think the conventional wisdom, well, first of all, we don't really know what the outcome is, right? I mean, seems pretty clear the Republicans are likely to take control of the House, but with a teeny majority. And I think the conventional wisdom, but this one's less certain, is that the Democrats are going to hold control of the Senate. I mean, we have to see. There are 3 races that are still outstanding. We don't know Nevada and we don't know Arizona. We have a runoff in Georgia. Democrats have to win 2 of those 3 to hold the Senate. But let's assume for a second conventional wisdom is the way this plays out. Democrats hold the Senate. Republicans take the House with a small majority. What does that mean for Secure? I think most people think that's the best case for Secure happening this year.
Okay.
Yeah. It's it has this broad bipartisan support, but like if the Republican Party had a red wave and had taken control, say, of material control over the Senate and had a bigger majority in the House, you might say, hey, they would take a pause and say, are we getting everything we want in this bill? Are we giving away too much? Don't we have more leverage? Let's revisit this thing. So that didn't happen. And similarly, if there'd been a surprise and the Democrats had held the House and increased their majority in the Senate, they might have done the same thing and say, hey, why are we cutting this bipartisan deal? We now have more leverage than we had before. But that didn't happen. So I think this is the best case scenario.
Okay.
Now, why wouldn't it happen? You're probably thinking to yourself, 414-5 in the House is a pretty good sign. The reality is retirement legislation never moves on its own. It's not like a big ticket item, right? It's not at the top of every member's minds. And so retirement legislation needs to be attached to some other piece of legislation, right? And the piece that's up in the air is there going to be a big spending bill at the end of this year? What's typically called an omnibus bill or a CR, a continuing resolution. And there probably is going to be something, because the government's going to run out of money come December 16th. They need to enact something to continue to finance the government. And the question is, will that be a big spending bill where they negotiate spending for all of 2023, in which case retirement's likely to get on? Or will it be a skinny bill where all they do is keep the government funded for a couple of weeks until the new Congress comes in? So why would, say, the Republican Party agree to a big spending bill at the end of this year rather than waiting until they take control of the House? Well, they probably don't want to start off their control of the House with a big fight over spending. They're going to have a hard time wrangling all of their members of the House to align behind one position. So I think the conventional thinking is there's a good chance we're going to get a spending bill because they're going to want to just get rid of it before the new Congress comes in and starts with the new plate. If it plays out that way, then we have a really, really good chance we're going to get retirement legislation this year. And that's how you get to that kind of 50 to 70% probability, So it'll all turn on not retirement policy. It's going to turn on other stuff.
Makes a lot of sense, yeah, from what we've seen. Well, thanks for sharing that. I want to make sure we hit on some other topics that I wanted to address with our advisors today.
Let me make sure we give the advisors sort of the good news, right? We only did the spending part of the bill.
Yeah, please. We need more good news.
There, right? Yeah, so there are some attractive things. So we started with the vegetables, if you will, but now we'll turn to the things, I wouldn't quite call them dessert, but they're nice to haves. There's, this is a pretty big package of legislation. I'm going to hazard a guess that we have something like 75 changes to the retirement plan rules. It's a lot of stuff. Most of it's pretty technical and small, things that eliminate administrative burdens, unfair provisions. But let me hit you with the kind of the big ticket items that are likely to be in there. Sort of a new catch-up contribution is very likely to be included. And you can kind of quibble about, is it a new one or just an enhancement of the current age 50 catch-up? But the idea is that at some age, and they're sort of trying to figure out what that age is, but it might be 60 or 62, people would be able to increase the amount of catch-up contributions that they can currently do at age 50, right? And it would, for example, go up to $10,000 would be the increased catch-up contribution. You hit that. The weird thing is, for budget reasons, it's probably going to have an age when you stop being able to do it. So it might be only available from 62 to 65 or 60 to 65. They're trying to figure out the economics, like how much it costs to do that, and do they have enough Roth raisers to pay for it. But there'll be some enhanced catch-up contributions, which will be nice. They're going to push back the required beginning date on the minimum required distribution age. It's currently 72. You'll remember Secure 1.0 pushed it from 70.5 to 72. They're going to push it back to 75. But they're going to do it in an annoying way. They're not just going to go to 75. They're going to go like 1 year at a time every couple of years over 10 years. So there'll be a step to 73, then a couple of years later, a step to 74. And at the end of the 10-year scoring window, we'll get to 75. Again, embarrassing congressional budget gimmickry, but that's why they're doing it. So it'll take a little while before we get there. I think the third one that will be kind of headline news, and but it sort of depends. It only really affects certain kinds of companies, will be new clear rules that will allow employers to make matching contributions to a 401k plan on student loan repayments. There's this issue where younger people, typically with significant student debt, have to choose between paying their student loans or deferring to the plan and getting the match. This is intended to get those people out of that sort of difficult choice. Say, no, you can pay your student loans without giving up the match. What kind of businesses are likely to do that? Well, it tends to be professional businesses with, trying to recruit who have significant student debt employees or employees with significant student debt. So those are kind of the newspapery headline ones that are insecure. But let me call out some other ones that I think are really interesting for people who work in the 401k system. Congress is pretty focused on the emergency savings problem, the perception that the vast majority of working Americans don't have enough savings. Like if they have their car breaks down, they don't have enough money to pay for a car repair, right? And so there's been this sense that, hey, we need to do something and we can tap the 401k system to be a solution. And so there are two ideas in the bills. And as I described them, think to yourself, these aren't ors. Congress is probably likely to do both of them. They're not going to choose between these. So the first is pretty simple. It's just a withdrawal right to pay for unforeseen emergency expenses. It'd be self-certification. I have this unforeseen expense. Let me have the money out. It would be like up to $1,000 is kind of the number you hear people talk about, and would come out of your elective deferral bucket. It's kind of a lifetime maximum of $1,000. You could repay it within 3 years and refresh that $1,000. But it's pretty simple. It's a lot like the qualified birth or adoption expense provisions that you guys might be familiar with.
Oh, yeah.
The other one is a little more radical and potentially complicated. Again, it's an option. A plan doesn't have to do this, but I think there'll be some interest in it. But it would create a new account within the 401k plan, an emergency savings account that would be funded through after-tax employee contributions, right? So not Roth, not traditional pre-tax, but after-tax employee contributions. It would have to be invested in a capital preservation vehicle like money market or stable value. And the employee could withdraw from it at any time to pay for emergency expenses. And there'd be a cap at like $2,000 is sort of the cap that they're kicking around, although they're trying to figure out what the right dollar cap is. But that's a pretty big deal in the sense of it's a kind of a fundamental restructuring of the 401k system and using it for a non-retirement purpose. The way they kind of picture deferral elections is that somebody would make a single election. Like say you're auto-enrolled and you're auto-enrolled, say at 6%. The way the provision would work is that 6% would first go into the emergency bucket on an after-tax basis. And once you filled the emergency bucket, it would spill into the regular 401k. And in the meantime, you would get the match if there's a match, including on the emergency money. Does that make sense? So pretty, a whole new account type.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Very different.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one and pretty likely to be included. The other one that I think is really interesting from a fundamental perspective is you guys might have heard about the Savers Credit. It's a tax provision that doesn't get a lot of airtime for whatever reason, but it's a modest tax credit that goes for individuals who are moderate earners and who contribute to a 401k plan, 403b, or an IRA. This bill would really radically rework the Savers Credit. So it would, one, make it refundable. The current Savers Credit is not refundable. You only get it to the extent you have taxes to offset. It would increase the dollar limits on who can get the Savers Credit. And then this is the kicker. It would say, no, you can't get that credit on your income tax return. Instead, we're only going to give it to you in the form of a matching contribution to an IRA or plan. So the first time we've had a governmental match, right? That's really what this is. It will be a governmental match And I don't even want to like think, I mean, our record keeping business, we're going to have to solve how we are collecting government matching contributions from the
Yeah.
federal government, right? And people are going to have to tell the government what their account numbers are, what plans they're in. I mean, it's going to be a mess, but it's super interesting. Governmental match, right? So those are the two that I think of as really fundamental: emergency savings and then the saver's credit. There are some other ones that are pretty interesting for the, especially the smaller end of the retirement plan market. Good chance that we're going to see enhancements of the startup plan tax credit, which is already quite generous, making it even more generous. One up in the air provision, not clear it'll get included, would actually create a new credit to compensate employers for the cost of the employer contribution. So the way it's written, it's up to $1,000 per non-highly compensated employee. So if the match for the non-high was $1,000, the employer could get an offsetting tax credit, essentially wiping out their expense. So we'll see if that gets included. It's expensive, but it would be great for startup plans. Auto enroll is another big one. There's a provision in the House passed bill that would say, hey, all new plans, if they're sponsored by somebody with more than, I think it's 10 employees, would have to have auto enrollment. So an auto enrollment mandate for startup plans is likely or even possible to be included. So I think those are all pretty interesting. Just to be super clear, those are just kind of the highlights. Again, it's something like 75 provisions. So if it happens at the end of the year, you're going to be getting lots of write-ups and lots of information, and you're going to be learning new stuff about the retirement plan rules.
And along those lines, Jason, I would imagine there'd be staggered effective dates.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think as everybody lived through Secure One or the Pension Protection Act, like, these things are often fire drills. Like, Congress is not great about the effective dates. I think the way people are talking about it right now is that everything that is mandatory in the bill, like that you would have to do, will have a delayed effective date. So think 1/1/24 if it's mandatory, and everything that's optional would be 1/1/23. Right. So think about like the student loan repayment provision. That would be 1/1/23 under that theory, right? Because you don't have to offer that as a feature. As somebody who works with a record keeper, I'm not thrilled about that because it may be optional at the plan level, but I'm sure our clients are going to be telling us we have to have it right away.
Yeah.
And that'll be the fire drill. So there's some industry pushback saying, hey, take those voluntary provisions, because for lots of us, they're not really voluntary, and push those back to 1/1/24. I think that's a tough lift, though. My betting money is optional effective 1/1/23, mandatory effective 1/1/24. But one of the things that'll be kind of weird about this bill is I don't think we're going to get to see it before it goes up for votes.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
that's a big one. The three bills that we've seen, we've been able to give comments, able to give input. But they're not planning to kind of run these things back through committee. They're going to try to cut a deal among the key members. There are 8 people who are really driving this, 8 members of Congress, and they're going to try to cut a deal amongst themselves and then just bring it to the floor for a vote, and it'll fly right through. So it'd be very hard to chime in on things like effective dates.
Well, thanks for sharing. There's a lot there, and 75 is just incomprehensible, actually. Anything else on this, or should we move to state-sponsored plans?
No, I think I'd just pay attention to the press. It'll be a little while. I think you're not going to see a little action until after the Georgia race is sort of resolved. So think mid-December for when you'll start to get a better sense of whether this has legs this year.
As always, Jason, great insight there. So we would be remiss not to talk about state-sponsored plans. We've seen the impact in so many states, and just understand kind of the why behind it. We've seen a lot of new startup plans. I think all the other record keepers out there have seen that as well as Definiti has, and we're just glad so many folks are getting a retirement plan in place. But how do you see this playing out? Do you see someday every state having a state-sponsored plan, or I'd just love your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I'd say no. We have 5 states right now that are live with mandates, right? California, Oregon, Illinois, Maryland, and Connecticut. We have a couple others with laws on the books, but it seems to take the states a really long time to get these programs up and running. You know, like Virginia is one that has a law on the books, but seems to be in no rush to go live. So in general, I doubt we're going to see all 50 states going to mandates. I think you'll continue to see them be in Democratic states. I think you'll see other states adopting them. You know, I think what you're going to see though is the states start to use a common structure and a common investment provider. You know, rather than every state that adopts one of these coming up with its own investment program and its own requirements, you're starting to see them sort of say, hey, this seems like a lot of work. Why don't I just use, for example, Oregon? You know, Oregon was the first, they're the biggest program that's out there, and they've been offering their services to other states. So I think you'll start to see a little bit more coalescing, which will be nice because, you know, if you do have companies that straddle state lines, it's kind of a mess to comply with multiple requirements. So I think you'll see a little bit more harmonization. And then I think, you know, over time, there's going to be a lot of pressure for a federal mandate to replace all these state mandates. You know, the Democrats would very much like to do that. They weren't able to get it done when Build Back Better failed. That was part of Build Back Better. But I think over time, you know, folks are going to warm to this in part just so that there's one set of rules. You know, the retirement system really isn't meant to be a state-based program with different rules across the border. So I think eventually we'll get there, but not in the next 2 years, not with divided Congress like we're about to see. You know?
Yeah, well, that's a great point. That's a great point. Well, thanks for sharing. We just, again, seen so much activity because folks are saying, I better have a plan for one reason or another, either to avoid the state plan or to attract and retain employees. But the number of new plans has been amazing.
It's great. And I just would harken back to that enhancements of the startup plan tax credits.
Yeah.
That, you know, have legs in Secure 2.0 that could make that conversation about, hey, do I want to do the state payroll deduct IRA or do I want to do a 401k a lot easier? Because
for sure.
In the best case scenario, if that credit for employer contributions and startup plans gets enacted, your plan is close to free for 3 to 5 years. I mean, that's kind of amazing.
Oh, it certainly is. And I feel like we're still talking about Secure 1.0 just because, as I mentioned earlier, CARES Act kind of overshadowed it, and we're still helping our, you know, mutual clients know about these incredible credits that are about to get better, or hopefully even better. Well, thanks, Jason. Again, trying to hit on so many things while we have you. PEPs is always a big topic and would love to hear your insight on those.
Yeah, so, you know, Secure 1.0 cleared the way for PEPs, or open multiple employer plans. You know, I think my sense from talking to people at the Department of Labor, like, I think a lot of folks have been wondering, hey, are we going to see a lot of regulatory activity? Are we going to see audits, enforcement activity around PEPs? You know, my sense from talking to folks at Labor is they're just going to sit and wait. They're not inclined to do anything right now. They're going to watch the marketplace and see what develops. And they're going to be particularly, you know, attentive to potential conflicts of interest. I think they have some sensitivity where the pooled plan provider may also be, you know, deciding what investments there are, and they might be an asset manager. They might be selecting the record keeper. They might have an affiliated record keeper. There's some sensitivity to those issues, but, you know, I think they're very much, let's see what happens in the marketplace. Let's not interfere with this. We'd love to see it grow and develop into a thing that extends coverage. But, you know, they're probably not going to tinker right now, would be my take. I bet we have at least a year or 2 years, barring a scandal, you know. Yep.
Yeah, good insight. Thank you. And then kind of flipping gears, how about the DOL? Will there be, you know, there are onerous rules for rollovers, you know, ESG, maybe a fiduciary rule 2.0. Love to get your thoughts on those.
Yeah, so this is, you know, let's assume we go back to our base case where the Republican Party takes control of the House of Representatives with a thin margin, and the Democrats hold in the Senate with the thinnest possible margins, 50-50. When that happens, not much is going to move legislatively. And so what you'll see is the president's party turning to the agencies and prioritizing regulatory activities. So I'd say the last 2 years, the Department of Labor has been surprisingly quiet. I'm going to predict that ends. They finally got their assistant secretary confirmed in the fall. It took 18 months to get her confirmed.
Wow.
But Lisa Gomez is now the assistant secretary, so they're fully staffed. And so I would very much expect at least two things to happen. One is, I'm sure is going to happen. We're going to get an ESG rule. So a rule that tells us, when you can offer, I think of it as like funds that have ESG in the name or that have ESG objectives. When can you offer those in a retirement plan? The department's finished working on it. They sent it to the White House for approval before they release it. I think it'll be out, no later than year end, but it could even be out by the end of this month.
Okay.
So that'll be really interesting. And I will just generally say, I wouldn't expect to see a huge number of ESG options in retirement plans. We just don't see it much today. And I think, what this rule is going to say is, hey, when people are making investment decisions, it's fine to consider environmental, social, or governance factors that are material to risk and return, right? That is part of sort of active investment management. But it's also going to say, hey, you can't give up return or take on risk for non-investment reasons, right? And so when you think about ESG, there's a lot of confusion in people's minds. There's sort of what I described first, which is integration. And this is clearly going to bless integration, meaning integrating ESG factors into your investment process. But when you think about ESG in the sense of like, hey, I'm going to screen out certain investments, like I'm not going to invest in oil and tobacco companies, or I'm not going to invest in any company whose carbon footprint is worse than a benchmark, that is not going to be okay in the retirement system. They're going to say that's giving up risk and return because you're not considering the value of the security and its future return profile. You're just screening them out. So that's how I'm going to predict it goes. I'm pretty confident I've got it right. We'll have to see what the rule says, but we should see it pretty soon. So that's ESG. And by the way, just ESG is going to continue to be a political, painful issue. Especially with the Republicans taking control of the House, you're going to see anti-ESG bills sort of saying, hey, we do not want woke investment managers criticizing the passive folks. It's just gotten to be a painful political issue, and it's only going to get worse, right? So sorry if that's kind of a bummer, but that's the reality. It's just gotten super politicized. The second thing I think we're likely to see from the Department of Labor, and I'm going to say this, but don't have a heart attack if you're an advisor, okay? We are going to see a fiduciary rule reproposal, right? They had it on their business plan. I think the betting money is it comes out by next summer. So in the next 6 to 8 months, it will have some similarity to the Obama era proposal that was so controversial and got struck down on the courts. But I'm going to predict it's not nearly as impactful and that they are more targeted and careful in what they do this time, right? I think they're going to be primarily focused on annuities, annuity recommendations, whether variable, fixed. I think they'll be much less impactful. There'll be no best interest contract, that kind of thing. But I think they're likely to try to make people giving recommendations in a brokerage capacity to a retirement plan into fiduciaries. We've already seen this big shift to fee-based advice in the retirement space. I think it will only accelerate it. But I'm really hopeful it won't be anything like the 2017 drama. You know what I mean? So it's going to happen, very likely to happen at least. but I don't think it'll be nearly as radical and dramatic as it was before. I think they have learned their lesson, or at least that's what they're telling me when I talk to them.
And thank you. Yeah, that I remember 2017 actually really well, so that's scary.
Yeah.
So and then rollovers. So did you want to hit on those real quick?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure all the advisors on the call are sort of dealing with their home offices rules around rollovers, because the Department of Labor has taken, this position, and the SEC and FINRA have taken the same position, that recommendations to roll from a plan to an IRA are fiduciary recommendations. And in the Department of Labor's case, that they need to be subject to a prohibited transaction exemption. That exemption generally requires documenting contemporaneously in writing why a rollover is in someone's best interests. And that means like comparing the investments in the plan to the investments in the IRA, and the services and all of that to make sure it's in the best interest of the investor. I'm sorry that you have to deal with all those complicated rules and that it's really difficult to get all the information that's needed to do this. I don't see that going away. I think if anything, you're going to see a fair bit of focus on enforcement in that area, and that they're only going to double down on that position as part of this fiduciary proposal. So I think rollovers are going to be painful, but there'll still be a viable path to gathering rollovers. And I do think the plan advisor is in a better position than the off-the-street advisor, because they'll know what's going on in the plan. Which is
for sure. Yeah. A great reason to bring retirement plans into your practices, for sure. So Thomas, I have a couple more questions for Jason, but I want to be careful about time. Do we have any questions, or do I have time for one more question for him?
Yeah, so thank you, Jason, for addressing the potential for another fiduciary rule. Process coming through. I know everybody's infinitely excited about that, given, as I like to call it, the industry's most historic pump fake of all time. It was Jordan-like. I think we would all agree on that. One question that I had for you, Jason, I was actually at the Spark Forum earlier this week. There are a couple of great presentations that, from an investment management perspective, that weren't necessarily focused on ESG so much as they were focused on target date. And, with American funds being such a strong, target date family, I was curious if you see anything on the horizon specific to the underlying construct of target date funds in the legislative environment, especially because there's a great point that was brought up earlier this week when I was at Spark, about how, there's always been this inverse relationship between stock and bond performance historically. And for the first time in a long time at a minimum, and in a lot of folks' entire careers at a maximum, stocks and bonds are both moving in the same direction at the same time, which has not been a good direction over the course of the year this year. And as folks move closer to retirement, obviously it's more of a fixed income approach, and obviously right now there's no safe haven. There hasn't been this year really for anyone. So any thought behind, and believe me, I'm not suggesting this, but are there any, I would say, worries from an investment management perspective that, ESG has been a hot topic, but it's interesting, it's been such a hot topic because the dollars aren't flowing there, whereas 80 cents on every dollar is going to target date. Any inclination that you're getting from Washington that there could potentially be a focus on target date?
Yeah, Thomas, it's a great question. You're absolutely right. It is sort of funny how much energy has been spent on ESG, given the small usage, and target date is the 800-pound gorilla these days. I think I'll mention two sort of teeny things that are going on that are potentially impactful. The first is Secure 2.0 does have a provision that would say that when you're disclosing to participants information about the target date fund's performance, you can use a blended benchmark. Today when you look at a lot of fee disclosure documents, you might even see like the target date fund compared to the S&P 500 index, which is kind of a useless comparison. This would say, hey, you can do it against a blend, like a 60-40 S&P 500 Barclays Ag blend. And that might be a little bit helpful to participants. But the one that's more apropos to your question is there is a report that the GAO, it's the Government Accountability Office, It's a branch of the government that does reports. A couple members of Congress asked them to take a look at target date funds and how they've performed, and are there any problems that Congress or the agencies should be addressing. And actually, I've done a couple calls with them about the report. They reached out to all the big asset managers to sort of chat about it. My sense is that report is going to be reasonably favorable to target date funds, that they've performed pretty well during times of market turmoil, and that we've seen participants staying invested in the long haul. But they have been asked by some industry players to kind of move away from target date funds as a QDIA. There are people who would like to see managed accounts take over that kind of slot as the default investment. My sense was GAO was not that warm to it because managed accounts are more expensive. They're tougher to benchmark from an investment results perspective. And I think target dates are going to come out okay on that report, that they're still pretty widely viewed as a great innovation for the industry and successful. And, I mean, you can take what I'm saying with a little grain of salt because I work for a company, obviously, that has a really successful target date series. But I think their perception is they've just been a home run for retirement savers, both from facilitating default investing, which has been great from a participation perspective, and we just haven't seen people selling out of target dates during big market downturns. They seem to be staying invested, which is, both of those are pretty good things from a retirement policy perspective.
Right. Thank you.
But it's a great question, and just because all the money is flowing into there, you're going to see attention to it. You know what I mean? You're spot on. Like, if you're a provider who does not have a successful target date series, you're going to be poking at the target dates.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jason and Karen, thank you so much for joining in, and Karen for moderating today with Jason. It's been fantastic seeing you. Your insights and the partnership that American Funds Capital Group provides is always top notch. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. We really appreciate it. And yeah, I thought you were going to have all of the answers today, Jason, but it certainly sounds that things are going to get a lot more interesting before they begin to get boring for us. But I guess that's part of the reason why we all continue to be employed in the industry.
Sure.
Keeps us all busy.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate the time today.
Thank you all. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Thomas. Have a great day.
You too.